Yeah, I think pacing is an issue for everybody, isn't it? And the thing that I found most helpful on that was working with the last therapist I worked with, and we did an awful lot of kind of strategic planning. So I brought in a lot more thinking from organizational psychology and corporate strategy and things like that, which you don't normally kind of hear those ideas and those thoughts within a therapeutic context. But we would do a lot more in terms of, right, what is it that we're aiming for? What are the, what resources do we need for it? What are the risks of it? How do we mitigate those risks? And setting up sessions in advance. So we would put aside, say, we always tended to work in 6-week blocks. Every therapist I've worked with, we've worked in sort of 6-7 week blocks, so like the half terms, and then there'd usually be a week off. And we always have a plan for what this 6 weeks is generally going to be about. It might be, we're dealing with what happened when I was 8, or it might be what happened when I left home, or it might be, university, or it might be something. So we had an overall focus, and we could go with whatever to come up as well, but there was a general plan over those 6-7 weeks. And then we would start that section of them by really planning out, well, okay, you want to talk about this thing, you don't want to talk about this thing, what we're going to need to get in place over the next, say, 2-3 weeks for us to be able to do work in, say, weeks 4 and 5. And that sounds really kind of almost kind of clinical, corporate-y, kind of coaching type thing. And it won't work for everybody. Nothing works for everybody, but it worked for me, and it came from me as well, because I saw the patterns that we kept going through of me saying, right, let's do it, let's go for it. And then we'd dive into material, and I'd get completely decompensated by it. And then we'd just spend the next few weeks mopping up the pieces, and I wouldn't be coping with it at all. And then I'd be avoidant of it, for another 6 months. And we'd go through that cycle over and over. So we identified that that's what was going on and said, well, do we want to continue that cycle, or do we want to try something else? And so that's how we ended up with how would you deal with it if you were going into you're going into a dangerous situation, maybe you're going into a combat zone, you're going in as the SAS. It would be planned, and you would put your mitigations in. So we would then work on what those needed to be, and what would happen after the session if we were going to do a particularly difficult session, what needed to happen before. And so that was, and then, additional support or additional contact was planned in advance so that we were doing it. And then we'd, have a few weeks of consolidating those gains and really learning from it before we did the next big piece of work. So it does require that kind of collaboration with the client to get them on board in terms of, I do want to do this. And I may have said this on another thing, but we started with a list of the things that I didn't want to tackle. And then one by one, they were bumped up onto the list of things that we were tackling, in order to put a container around it of that if we go there, I don't want just to end up in some mess of flashbacks and dissociative kind of everything happening. So let's make a decision now about what we're not going to be talking about and where we're not going on it. And that helped internally within myself for us to kind of plan and figure out, okay, yeah, no, we feel okay on that because we know we're not touching that subject. And so it was all agreed. There was communication and collaboration on it. So I think there's a pressure, isn't there, to kind of like, you've got a session with a client and you feel like you need to do some work and get something done and achieved. And it feels a waste to spend 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 sessions planning to do some work. But that taught me so much as a client and as a human being in terms of, don't just jump into things. I'm still rubbish at it, but don't jump into things, but plan how are you going to do it. And it brings that cause and effect thinking in, which is front brain and online, that is such a part of living successfully as well. So how you do the therapy, I think, is as important for the client, for them to bring those kind of approaches into their life generally, as important as doing the actual work itself.